Hello brave people, welcome back to my channel. I hope you are having an amazing day. So in this tutorial series, we are diving into the world of load balancing. We'll see or we'll explore what load balancing is, how network load balancing works and what happens behind the scenes. Then we'll jump right into the hands-on demonstration in Microsoft Azure where we'll set up two virtual machines, then we'll configure a Azure load balancer and we'll integrate step by step. If you're ready to skill up your skills and learn something new, then let's get started.
Let's understand what is load balancing or what is network load balancing. So let's start with a very simple scenario. Suppose a user logs into their system and tries to access your website. For example, the website is hosted on the single server. We call it as an application server. So now let's understand what happens at the background. The user searches a website. In that, the request comes from user system and travels through the internet and reaches the application server where our application or website is hosted. The application server processes the request and send the appropriate response back to the user. So this is a very common behavior for handling a user request. A single user sends a request from his system. The server processes its request and send it back a response to the user. Now let's assume there are multiple users. Previously we are only checking for us. There are 4 users simultaneously access the user website. In this case, what happens? All the requests sends to a same server. The server will process each request one by one or parallelly and depending upon the capacity of a server and send back a response to the 4 users. So it will not breaking anything. So all the request that comes from the client side, all those requests will be served to the client. So now let's take a third scenario. So initially there are 4 users accessing the application server. The user sends a request to the server and the server responds without any issue. With a small load, there is a no disturbance in the performance problem. Now imagine the number of user increases to 100 or 10,000 users. A single application server struggles to handle the incoming request because what happens, there are 10,000 users simultaneously sending the request, so our application server struggling to handle those incoming requests. This leads to slower down a response time, even failure to the server request. To handle this high traffic, scaling is necessary. Then horizontal scaling involves adding the more application servers to handle this increased load. So what we'll do, will for example increase the server size. In horizontally we'll increase one more server, then again one more server, and then again one more server. So we increase, for example, we previously we have a single server, now we have a 10 server. But simply adding server doesn't solve the issue how to efficient distribute the request among these created new servers, where the load balancing come into the picture. Incoming request: when 10,000 user sends request to load balancer, accept all these requests instead of overwhelming any single server, then distributes those incoming requests. It intelligently distributes the request across available servers. For example, if you have a 10 server, the load balancer will allocate the request dynamically based on the server capacity and predefined rules. how does the load balancer decide where to send those requests? The load balancer uses a dynamic load balancing technique to allocate those requests. It monitors the load on each server. For instance, or for example, if application server 2 is a 20% utilized, then the load balancer might access more requests to it until it reaches its capacity. Similarly, if application server 5 has more free memory, then requests are routed to their application server 5. Requests are distributed dynamically to maintain a balance across all these servers and ensuring the efficient use of resources. So in this way, this load balancer will traverse or send those requests to this application server. Now, what is the benefit of this load balancing? So, the load balancing handles high traffic. It ensures that traffic is evenly distributed, preventing any single server from being overwhelmed. It improves the performance by distributing the load. The system response is more faster, more reliable to the user. So this is all about the load balancing. The load balancing accepts the incoming request and dynamically distribute those incoming requests to the application server, and then get the response from the application server and send it back to the client. So the use of this load balancer is to accept the request and send those incoming requests dynamically to the application server and send the response back to client as fastly. So this is all about the load balancing or the network load balancing. So that's all. We covered the concept of load balancing or a network load balancing. So now it's time for the demonstration. So in this demo, we'll create a two virtual machine and we'll set up an application or web server on each virtual machine. Then we'll create a simple HTML page on the both virtual machine. For example, virtual machine 1 and virtual machine 2. We'll just display those messages. And then we'll set up a load balancer in Azure to distribute a traffic between the two virtual machines. Then we'll see the loads, how this dynamically routes this request to these available virtual machines. So let's quickly dive into a Azure portal and get started with the demonstration. So now let's create two virtual machines, and then we'll set up a load balancer to access these two virtual machine, and then we'll see how it works. So I have just logged into my Azure account. So this is I'm using the free subscription. So in that, once you log into your Azure account, then it will show you this dashboard. So in that, there are a couple of services that it's mentioned in this. So now let's quickly go to virtual machines and then create a virtual machine. So here is the option to click or to create a virtual machine. So let's click on this service. So it will open the new virtual machines window. So in that, just click on the create button and then click on this Azure virtual machine. So it will open a new window where you need to fill some details while to create a virtual machine. So now, as everyone knows that while creating any services in Azure, you need to create a resource group, or if a resource group is already present, then you can check. So let's create a new resource group, that demo, and then it will validate the name. If it's okay, then it will show the green tick. Let's click on OK. Now resource group is mapped. So now let's create a virtual machine name. So let enter the VM1. Then I'll use the region that is West Europe and the availability zone, the zone that is 1. But I'll use most of settings as is, but in your case, if as per the requirement you can change. So I'll use the image that is Debian server on the Linux, and I'll use the size that is set for the default size. Then I'll use the authentication type as a password. So here I'll create a username ta1, then just set the password, then enter the confirm password, and then now select the inbound port. So I'll keep this as HTTP along with SSH, and then click on next. So it will open the disk tab where we don't need to fill anything. So now let's go to the network tab. In the network tab, if you see the virtual network is automatic populated, then subnet and the public IP of virtual machine 1. So now let's just click this checkbox. So while deleting the virtual machine, it will automatically delete its associated public IPs. Then just click, there is an option to create and review. So let's click on the review plus create button. So it will validate the details that we entered, and if any issue found, it will show us the message. Otherwise it will show the validation pass message. So if you see, the validation is in running state, it will take some time. So now if you see, the validation is passed. So now let's click on the create button. So now it will start the virtual machine creation process, and you will see the status on the right corner. So if you see the initializing deployment, then submitting the deployment, and it will open a new window where you can see this current progress of the virtual machines deployment. But meanwhile, what we'll do, we have to create two virtual machines. So now we have done with the one virtual machine. So now we will follow the same step to create a second virtual machine. So now let's go to the home again, then go to the virtual machine section. Here let's click on the create again Azure virtual machine. So now I'll use the resource group that we just previously created, that is demo, and then I'll give the name of virtual machine, that is VM2, and then the region and the most of things I'll keep the default as is. Then I'll use the password for the authentication type, just I'll use the same TA01 or 02, and just enter the password. Then inbound port, that is HTTP plus SSH. Then next go to the next tab. So now let's click on the network tab, and in this network tab, if you'll see this virtual network that is auto populated, which is on VM vnet, you can cross validate. So I'm in virtual machine 1, and in this network section you will see this the virtual network or the virtual subnet, that is VM1 vnet, that is default. So now it is auto populated, and then the public IP for virtual machine 2 is VM2 IP. Then let's click on this checkbox. As I mentioned, so it is required for once we delete this virtual machine 2, it will automatically delete its associated public IPs. So now let's click on the review plus create button. It will again validate the details that we entered, and once validation is done, then just click on the create button. So it will start the virtual machine creation process. So now let's click on the create button. It will start the initializing deployment. So if you see in the right corner, so now we have created two virtual machines, VM1 and VM2. So now it's time to set up a web server on these two virtual machines, VM1 and VM2, and then we'll create a small index file, and then we'll check or we'll try to access this created file with the public IP of VM1 and VM2. So I'll use the engine X. So I have done the setup already. So now let's go to the VM1 and try to access the created web server file. So now let's copy this public IP and then just try to check the created app. So let's copy this public IP, and then let's Click on enter. So it will, now we are connected to virtual machine 1. So in that virtual machine we just created a simple index file. So in that we just printed this message. So now let's go to the virtual machine 2 and then try for virtual machine 2 also. So let's copy the public IP of virtual machine 2 and then just enter this public IP. Though is if you see this, we are connected to VM2. So now we are done with the app creation also in the two virtual machine. So it's time to create a load balancer. So now let's close this window and then go to the home again and then click on the load balancer. So it will open the new window where we need to click on the create button to create a load balancer. It will again open the window where we need to fill the details. So let's select the resource group that we just created, like test1, then the name of load balancer, so DALB, and the region that I use, that is West Europe, and the scale with the standard, but the type that we choose, that is public. So let's select the radio as a public and the tier, that is regional. So now let's click on the front end IP configuration button. So it will open the next tab. So in that, let's click on add a front-end IP configuration and then just set up a front-end IP. So let's enter the name. Front-end IP, then IP version, that is IPv4, then the IP type, that is IP address, then the public IP, that which is not created yet. So let's create a new and then give the name of public IP, and then the most of setting then we'll keep as is. Then click on save. So it will create a front-end IP configuration, and if you see, it's populated in this, so front-end IP. Now let's click on the backend pool. In that, we'll map these two created virtual machine with the backend pool. So let's click on add a backend pool and enter a name of backend pool, or we'll just enter this backend P and we'll select the network, that is VM vnet test1, and then in that we'll select the IP address, and in that let's select the drop down where two IP address is associated. So this 10.0.0.4 is the private IP address of our virtual machine 1, and 10.0.0.5 is the private IP address of our virtual machine 2. So let's cross check it. I'll just duplicate this one and then just cross check. Click on the home, go to virtual machine 1, and just scroll down here. If you see, the private IP of private IP address of virtual machine 1 is 10.0.0.4. Likewise, we can check for VM2 also. So 10.0.0.5. So let's map those IP addresses. So if you select this one, it will populate the resource name for VM1 and then for VM2, and let's click on save. So it, now we created this two backend pools. So now let's go to the next tab. So let's create an inbound rule. So again, click on add a inbound rule button. In this window, we need to set up a front-end IP configuration along with the backend. So let's create a name. That will be rule, then the IP version, that is IPv4. Then select the front-end IP address that we just created in the previous tab, and the backend pool where we map these two virtual machines. Then the port. So now our front-end configuration is checking or work. The port is mapped on the front end, that is 80, and the backend port also 80. Then create a health prop, so which is not created yet. So let's go and let's or just enter some default one, and then the protocol, that is TCP port 80, and the interval within 5 seconds it will again call. So let's save this, and we don't need to change anything in the remaining part. So let's click on save, and then let's click on outbound rule. So we don't need to set up outbound rule now, so let's skip this and let's click on the review plus create button, and it will again validate the details that we entered. And once the validation is passed, so if you see the validation is passed, then just click on create. So now it will start the load balancer creation process. So submitting the deployment, it will again open a new window where we can see the status. Now our load balancer creation is done, so let's go to the resource again, and now load balancer mapping is done. And if you see the overview page, here is the details so of the created load balancer, the resource group that we mapped, and all the details. If you see the click on the show more with the public IP of our load balancer. Now it's time to check the load balancer, how it works on with these two virtual machines. So let's go to the front end IP configuration and then just copy the IP address of our load balancer, and now open a tab and just click on enter. Now if you see, we are now connected to our virtual machine 1. So let's try in the another browser. I'll use this incognito mode where I'll just again hit this, and then let's try. I think let's continue with this time. If you see, we are now connected to virtual machine 1. So automatically it will divert our traffic or incoming traffic to virtual machine 2. So in this way the load balancer works. So and one more thing that you need to check, how the load balancer is mapped. So in this setting section there is insight on the monitoring section. So let's click on the insight. It will show you the graph how this two virtual machine is mapped with our load balancer. So if you see, this VM1 and VM2 is mapped with the backend pool, and we created the load balancing rule and the front end IP configuration just we created. So in this way you can create a load balancer and map this two virtual machine with no load balancer. So with the load balancer IP you can access this virtual machine 1 and virtual machine 2. So yeah, that's it. A quick recap. In this tutorial we covered what is load balancing, how it works for a single user and multiple user, the role of load balancer in dynamically distributing the request to scale up a application server. Then we have done with a demonstration where we created a two virtual machines. In that virtual machine we set up a simple web server on each virtual machine, and we created a index.html page where we displaying some messages like virtual machine 1 and virtual machine 2. Then we configured a load balancer to distribute the incoming request between these two created virtual machines, and then we tested how the load balancer dynamically routed a request to ensuring a seamless performance. So this is all about the load balancing. So thank you for watching. If you found this video very helpful, please support the channel. If you have any questions or doubt, feel free to drop a comment. I'll get back to you as soon as possible. See you in the next video. Until then, have a wonderful day. Thank you again.